When we talk about climate justice, this is where the gender piece comes in. So across the world, we talk about climate change. We talk about the science and the effects that you'll see in kind of your everyday life. So, there'll be water levels rising, maybe drought, maybe fires. Um, and all of these different things will affect you differently based on a number of different things. That could be location, it could be race, it could be where you're based in the world, gender, sexuality, all these different kind of I suppose experiences. And so just to, I suppose, start us off, um, what is climate change? So climate change refers to the long-term shift in global temperatures and weather patterns. So the effects of these things include, as I said, like drought, not enough food, more severe storms, warming, rising ocean. But then there's also things like more health risks, poverty and displacement, or conflict. So for example, with health risks, that could make you more likely to experience disease. It could mean that, let's say, water has become contaminated, you might be more likely to get sick. Things like poverty and displacement. So climate change, sometimes you have to leave your home because you can't live there anymore. It's unsafe. But also, it also means that when, let's say, conflict begins. Conflict can have a massive impact, like war, on your local environment, and it can make it more vulnerable to climate shocks. And that results in a lot of people leaving as well, which is not great. Um, I'm having some issues where it's going in and off, but I think it's sharing now. Sorry. Just had to recalibrate a little bit there, guys. So climate change, what it does is it multiplies the threats, and these impacts are largely determined by a population's vulnerability and resilience. So they are more likely to be felt disproportionately by those who suffer socioeconomic inequalities. So let's say, for example, myself, I'm a young person living in West Cork. I have a roof over my head. I have two parents who provide an income for me. I'm going to school each day. There's some things that are challenging. Let's say I don't have any public transport, big lack of access to the internet where I was from. But overall, I have a roof over my head. So when things like climate change happen, I'm kind of safe. But then I have a young friend of mine who I met, and she lives in Uganda. Now, she's got a roof over her head. She goes to school every day, just like me. But because she is also a member of the LGBT community, it's a little bit more unsafe for her. Um, so when something like climate change hits, it makes it harder for you to seek refuge because in Uganda, being gay is illegal. Um, And so when we talk about these things, we're talking about it through a climate justice lens. And that looks at the climate crisis through an equality and human lens rather than just science. And it recognizes that those who are least responsible for climate change suffer its gravest consequences. So one way that we look at things, and this is how we kind of have identified that gender has a massive impact, is through an intersectional lens. So this is how we understand how different characteristics like race, place, age, and gender and geography intersect with each other and create what we call power structures that can make things a little bit more challenging and create barriers. So for example, if you think about who you are, um, where you're from, your gender, your race, your income, things like this, that can all influence on how you experience climate change. And so this intersectionality has been around for a long time, but it's been really pioneered by Black women. And they've had a massive impact in, I suppose, sharing this knowledge and spreading this knowledge to help empower other people to take action. So, for example, one of them is Leah Thomas, and she's an intersectional environmental activist and eco-communicator based in Southern California. So she grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which is around 10 minutes away from where the shooting of Michael Thomas happened by the police. And at that time, she found that no one was talking about the intersection of environmental injustice and social injustice. And she gained kind of a bit of notoriety after she used an Instagram post that used the phrase intersectional environmentalism, which is very long-winded. And she talks a lot about how gender and climate intersect and interact. So there's a couple of different things that impact how you experience climate change. There's things like, let's say, our economic background. And the gender lens here is really important because when something, let's say, happens, a climate shock, or if you experience extreme flooding or fires, often a lot of people who are most affected, who are the most vulnerable, are women and children. And so climate change impacts water security, food production, health and infrastructure, and affects around 3.3 to 3.6 billion people in high-risk areas. And low-income areas, which contribute the least to the emissions but face the most severe consequences, are really disproportionately affected. And so women in many developing nations have less access to land, less access to financial resources, and less access to social support, which makes them even more vulnerable during a climate crisis. And when we say less access to land, what that means is that women in developing countries are often the leaders of the farm or the leaders of the business in their family structure. And they'll be doing the work every day, they'll be keeping it running, but they don't have access to things like credit or loans, which a lot of us at your age probably aren't thinking about credit and loans, but that is a big piece of being able to have a successful farm. And as a woman in a lot of these countries, you can't own the land. Only a man can own the land. Only a man can have a bank account. Only a man can access the education, which makes it really challenging if you are the person who's actually doing most of the work every day. And displacement. So as climate disasters will force families to move, women face increased risk of gender-based violence, exploitation, and limited access to healthcare. Then I suppose another one of those intersecting kind of identities that can enhance vulnerability is your race and ethnicity. So Black and Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by climate change due to systemic inequality and environmental racism. And that refers to not having equal access to things like clean environments and basic resources because of your race. And this is actually how, when we talk about climate justice and all of the different things that come under that, it came from the Black Indigenous communities. And then it really became into light from the Black African American community in Warren County in North Carolina, where they realized they were being unfairly targeted for toxic waste disposal and fought back. Now, they lost their fight, they protested, they got loads of people on board, but they eventually lost. But it had a bigger impact. It showed people that this was happening and that this was unfair, and it brought more people on board. And so climate change causes an increase in all forms of gender-based violence. After disasters, women are less able to access things like relief, assistance, and further threatens their livelihoods, well-being, and recovery. And then women's and girls' health is endangered by climate change by limiting access to services and healthcare, as well as increasing risks related to maternal and child health. So many social services and disaster relief programs, which are the programs that help after a big crisis, like homeless shelters or food pantries, and financial assistance are managed by these big charities. And sometimes what happens is that based on your gender or your sexuality, a lot of people actually end up being turned away. If you are a member of the transgender community, for example, it's a lot harder to access some of this relief. As a lot of countries, it's illegal, which creates some challenges. And then one of the biggest challenges is, so agriculture is the most important industry for people in low and lower income countries. And in small communities, there's been instances of extractive industries. So that's like mining, and like digging for gold or precious metals. Um, and these camps have contributed to a lot of, I suppose, it's a really dangerous place to work. And often the people who are working in those dangerous kind of industries are women and children. And then I suppose when it comes to water scarcity, which happens when, maybe infrastructure breaks down or there's conflict or there's climate change factors, it means that it creates a lack of access to things like water, food, medicine, and you often have to travel for quite a while, quite far distance in order to access the water. And it's usually women who are sent to do this. Just there. So one of the things we talk about when we're trying to, I suppose, address these issues is around it's around ensuring that when we are I say, as when a country is trying to support areas that have been affected, that they are trying to ensure that they are reaching those most vulnerable, and that includes women. It can sometimes be more challenging to bring women into these programs because they have so many other responsibilities, and challenges and barriers that prevent them from accessing it. They often will bear the responsibility for securing food, water, and fuel. Girls often have to leave school earlier to help their mothers. For girls, water shortages in schools can affect enrollment, attendance, and performance because in a lot of countries they are the hold most responsibility for gathering of water. Climate change causes an increase in all forms of gender-based violence. And after disasters, women are less able to access things like relief and assistance, which further threatens livelihoods, well-being, and recovery. And then women and girls' health is endangered by climate change because it limits access to services and healthcare and increases risks related to maternal and child health. So there's a lot going on there. It's quite intense. Um, One of the, I suppose, important things to recognize is that it is disproportionate affecting them, but there is a lot we can do to try and target and address a lot of these issues. And when we look at it through a climate justice lens, it's described as a just transition. So when we talk about, fixing climate change or moving forward or creating a more equal society, we talk about a just transition, which is basically means as we move forward, we are taking everyone with us. No one is left behind, and that we're not leaving people behind because it's harder to bring those people with us. But everyone, everyone comes with us, which is really important. We hear this term a lot in relation to agriculture and ensuring that we support farmers to transition. But this applies across the board. And so this is kind of what they describe as the things we need to do. Some of the most important ones in addressing, I suppose, gender justice when it comes to the climate crisis is providing financial supports for a just transition. So offering people the opportunity to skill up, and train up is essential. And providing financial supports is a really big part of that. Providing supports to the consumers. So making sustainable behavior more affordable and accessible. So sometimes if you ever go to a supermarket, look at what is the cheapest food. And quite often that food is like in terms of meals and stuff, it's stuff that's highly processed, it's stuff that maybe hasn't come from within the country you're living in. It's not always like the most healthy and nutritious food. And we talk about, how important it is to buy organic and stuff like that. But that can be really challenging, especially to a family environment. Um, and if you don't have time to, you're cooking and cleaning and you're minding your kids and there's all this going on. It can be really hard to be, I suppose, sustainable as well as affordable. So it's really important that we ensure that sustainable behavior is affordable. And then supporting developing countries. So the countries who have contributed the least need the most help. And I'll just move on. And then taking an intersectional approach. So when we talk about climate change and the issues, that we have an understanding that it can affect people more than maybe other people. We see one of the things that is most challenging, I think, is trying to hold those in power accountable. So the big corporations and the industries that have really unsustainable practices. And this is way too wordy, this slide, but it basically means that understanding that as a person, you're not just one thing. You aren't just like one blob. You have all these different things that have made you who you are, and that creates you. And that's really important. And that everybody has that. And for some people, there might be more barriers to getting involved or to learning than other people. The most important thing is figuring out how we break down those barriers together. Sorry, that's this is from another one. And so an example of when we see, I suppose, women taking action, um, one of the best examples, or my favorite examples, is in Standing Rock. And this is where the Sioux tribe led a resistance against this pipeline that was being built in their local community. And that was impacting on their access to water, their resources, but it was also destroying sacred land. And women played a really central role in the protests. And there's a group called the Women's Warrior Society that they started, which defends the land, water, and their communities. And this is a quote from one of the elders who was involved. And she says, "The water is a woman, this great mother who's just always providing life, endlessly, tirelessly providing life." And that is why they fought back. They fought back because they knew how important their access to water was, and they were pivotal in making it a success. Um, so they led the resistance. It's actually still ongoing. Um, and this group, they believe that gender equality and environmental justice are completely inseparable, because as Indigenous women, they are deeply tied to the preservation of land and water and their way of life. And their leadership of this really shows the intersection of gender and environmental justice, as just really, really important. And so some things that, sorry, just moving on. So one of the things that we can do is, one, acknowledging environmental injustice. So we can't fight it if we don't acknowledge it. And we need to be able to feel that we can take on these harder topics, and advocate for them. And then listening, really important. So just I have here are some really cool environmental activists. So on the left-hand side is Shay Bastida. So she is an Indigenous activist, and she's one of the lead organizers of the Fridays for Future in New York City. And she started this program called Re-Earth Initiative that aims to support marginalized communities to access support on climate justice work. And then We have Lispriya from, she's involved in these United Nations climate change conferences, and she's given loads of different TED Talks around this movement she's founded called the Child Movement, which is a global justice organization that supports young people. And then we have Greta Thunberg, who you're probably familiar with. And she started the school strikes for climate at 15 due to just huge anxiety over climate change. And then lastly, we have Autumn Peltier. So she's an Indigenous rights activist from Canada, and she's the named Chief Water Commissioner for the Nishnawbe Nation in 2019. And that was just when she was 14 years old. So she's a really strong advocate around water pollution and how it's affecting her community. And then, and then as an individual, there's just little things we can do with climate change, and just as we've touched on it. So it's looking at our behaviors. So maybe reducing fast fashion, eating more plant-based meals, getting involved. So joining a climate protest, using our voice, writing to TDs. If there's things that are affecting you and your community and you feel that it's unfair, you should say something. And take action and bring people with you as well. And then starting a conversation is often one of the best ways to do anything. It's a ripple effect. And it can have a really big impact. You know, you having one conversation with someone who may not know anything about this, that can have a really big impact. And then these are just some books that are, so this one here, it's not actually how to blow up a pipeline. I just want to say that it's actually just around it's just an interesting book. But the ones I want to point out especially is The Intersectional Environmentalist, long-winded term, but she just breaks down gender and climate and environmentalism really nicely. Michaela Loach is an example of a really cool author. She's a Black feminist author from the UK, and she writes a lot about just about the different issues that she's experienced. And then we have Mary Robinson, who is a very cool climate activist, who is one of the main reasons it's kind of the word climate justice has come into, I suppose, the conversations that we're having in like the wider world at the moment. And she's done really amazing work in amplifying the voices of women involved in climate. It's kind of one of the things that drives her. She started this movement called the Dandelion Movement. And this project is all about seeing yourself as a dandelion seed. And you know, when we blow the dandelion like seed head, and then all these different seeds go fluttering off, that's, she wants people to imagine that they are one of those seeds going off to spread the word, which is very cool. And then that kind of brings us to the end of this. So this is just a quote from Leah Thomas, and the earth and its ecosystems thrive on diversity, and so does climate action. And that just thought that is a nice quote to end on. And yeah, if you have any questions or queries, we have some other projects that I'll just get up there that you can get involved. So for example, the Young Environmentalist Awards. So let's say you want to do something in your school, you want to get involved, you want to raise awareness on a topic. This is a really good program to have a look at. So if you're between the age of 10 to 18, you can get involved in the Young Environmentalist Awards. It's great for giving you kind of a structure to figuring out what your project will look like, and it runs over a long period of time, so you've loads of time to develop it. If you want to learn more and you want a workshop in your school, you can book in a workshop. We do them on topics like waste or fashion, marine life, and more. And you can reach out to bookings at ECO-UNESCO.ie. And then you want to meet other young people who are maybe interested in similar topics to you. Our groups focus on things like climate justice and sustainable development. So if you want to dive a bit deeper into those topics, absolutely let us know. Um, and yeah, there is a few other bits and pieces that are going on this week. So there's Energy and Me, there's Hidden Heroes of Our Freshwater, Food Future and the Planet, What If Waste Could Be Useful, and Nature for a Happy Mind. And yeah, thank you. I'm really sorry that this session didn't go the way that we had originally intended. Unfortunately, our speaker had some really serious internet issues and was just struggling to join. Um, so I stepped in. But there will be another session on later today, I think, if all goes well. We'll need to check that. But yeah, hopefully this was still informative. Um, and if you have any questions, please fire them into the chat or unmute and let me know if you have any. But yeah, if you have any questions, let us know.
Maya, thank you. Just jumping in there because we got one via email for a group that wasn't able to attend. But the question was, what gives you hope in the fight for gender and climate justice?
I think, oh, this is really cheesy, but I think it is community. Um, so when I first got involved, I didn't get involved in climate stuff or learning about the climate until I'd say I was around 20. And I was always really interested in biodiversity and ecology, knew loads about plants and the sciencey stuff, but I refused to learn about climate change because it made me really scared. I watched a David Attenborough show where basically the ice caps were melting, there was horrible things happening, and I just got really scared. This was when I was younger, so I kind of just pretended it didn't exist for as long as I could. And I got involved in a group um, that I didn't know was going to be talking about climate change or climate justice. And it was with the National Youth Council. And I learned what the phrase was, and I realized that it actually was relevant to me, and that learning about it through the social lens rather than just science made it less scary. But what gives me hope is when I go to, let's say, back home to West Cork, and there's loads of people who are, really enthused and really knowledgeable, and they're all trying to do something for it. They're all trying to contribute in some way, shape, or form. And they're really open to sharing their ideas and sharing their knowledge. Um, I find then it feels like I'm not in my own little bubble, whereas sometimes it can feel a little bit like you're in a bubble. Like when I was in college and there wasn't really anything for me to get involved with at the time. Um, and then with the gender element, I really think it's seeing like people who are even younger than me, um, taking action and like talking about it. What I've noticed is that compared to when I was like 15, 16, people are way more informed and they're way more open with having conversations. Whereas when I was that age, we didn't talk about it. And that's why I was so afraid of it because we didn't talk. So I think it is cheesy, but it's the community that is around me, but also seeing young people being so informed and so knowledgeable and so passionate. Like, I don't know, it makes me a little happy. I come out of something, I'm like, oh, they were really cool. Um, yeah, a few things there. A few things there.
That's a nice answer. Yeah, it's hard for it not to be cheesy, I suppose,
Yeah,
with a
yeah,
question like that. If anyone has any other questions, do feel free to put them in the chat. It is quarter to though, so if anyone wants to leave, feel free to do so. Maya, we can probably hang on for 1 or 2 minutes,
yeah.
and then we'll finish off. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Great to have you.